So what I'm going to explain right now is the importance of cookies, how it works, and how that eventually is related to the database and why we need all this SQLite 3 programming and stuff like that. Normally, when you go onto a website that requires user data, for example, Amazon, it is important that Amazon remembers who you are. Now that we are on a browser, we can see that if we click on Amazon, it remembers who I am. We see the account right there, and for that reason, it is able to remember orders and stuff of that sort. And the reason why that is related to a database is there needs to be a way to store all of that information in a persistent way that isn't local to the browser, or else if a user is to close or X out of a website, then the data will go with it. So this is the purpose of this database right here. If you input information into a browser in, let's say, the form of a form, and then it gets sorted out into your query string, to make it persistent, cookies has been created in order to be an identifier. And so this identifier is essentially a key used in the database. The browser only has to store one piece of information, let's say your session ID or your user ID. And so when the browser is attributed to a certain key it has been given from the beginning, then once it's put into the Python code and sent down to the database has all the different columns of information. For example, your previous orders if you're on Amazon, or past shows if you're on Netflix, or any prior information, and it looks up that user using the user ID or session ID from the browser. This cookie is that user ID. It's that little crumb that allows the database to pick up all the other information and distribute it back to the Python code. So to give an idea of how this browser to Python code to database system kind of works, I have a website running up here that requires certain information to be filled out. So let's just enter this in. And once you create this form, we see the query string pop up here. And so then if we go to the Python code that's running this, we see this method called getUser right here, which is used. And essentially what it does is it takes the cookie ID from the user and it accesses the database right here. It establishes this SQLite 3 connection, and then it goes through and finds the database. Once it's found the database, it selects information and it returns it in the form of this user data. I explained basic HTML and Python and the reason as to why you need Python. If you want the website to be interactive, a database can kind of be interpreted like a Excel sheet or a worksheet. It's a bunch of columns with different information depending on what website you're making. And so I kept on talking about how SQLite is the way that you kind of interact with it. And so we can see right here, this is some test. This is just some template code. But basically you can see here, this first line is to create a table in a database. By the way, a database can consist of several different tables. For example, if you are keeping track of checkouts in a library, you may want a table of checkouts with time, use, person who took it out, type of book. You may also want a table of books. And so you can create a table. In this case, this table will be called table 1 with variables 1 varchar and 2 small int. So this basically means that you create a table, which the first variable 1, we can call this, maybe change this to name. And varchar means that there's a max of 10 characters or 10 characters. And 2, we can maybe call this favorite number. Small int, this just is relative size. I think small int should be fine for most cases. If we copy and paste this into terminal right here, I already have a database created called database. So if we type this in, we don't really see anything. That's because we only created the table. We haven't yet inserted anything. And so that's when we have stuff like this. So insert into, that is when we need insert statements. So we have insert into table 1 values, hello and 10. Pretty intuitive, pretty self-explanatory. This should work. So the way to test this, to see that it's actually done its job, we can use this select statement right here. And so if we do select star from table 1, that the star, by the way, essentially just means a wild card or anything. So this means select anything from table 1. If we do type in select star from table 1, we should get hello and 10. So it works. Another thing to look at is how do we make the Python code dynamically input pieces of information into the database. All right, so the way that you add data values into a table dynamically through Python is through something that looks like this. So when you input data into a database, it only accepts it in a list, no matter the length. And so the syntax looks something like this. Most of this will not need to be altered. Again, I will have this in the description. Here, this is essentially creating a connection to the database, which we have called database. Maybe not the greatest idea. And then this is the string that we will be changing dependent upon what we need. And so in this case, I've updated a table called users, and it sets the username, so this question mark color, question mark where user ID equals question mark. And so these question marks, these 3 right here, be filled in by these 3 values. And you can see that through this, you see cursor.execute, SQLite select query, this thing, and it fills in these 3 data values as these 3 things. And that is how you are able to update SQLite through database through Python. Now all that's left is making the connection to the browser through Python and setting cookies so that we have this connection between Python code to the database, back to Python, and to the browser.